When we forgive, we are no longer staring at what was done. When we're staring at what was done over and over, we're reliving the pain, because that's the way the brain works, right? When we visualize something, when we think about something, the neurons in our brain react to what we're thinking about as if it was happening. That's why all the feelings come up in the body, because your body is reacting to it as if it's really happening, even at the moment. So it can be years later. And by continually looking at it and thinking about it, you are re-traumatizing yourself. And so I wanted to give you guys some tips that helped me. And hopefully, if you're struggling with this, especially if you've been out of relationships for a long time, but the anger keeps you glued to them, hopefully these tips can help. So we have to remember that in order to forgive, if we are burning with anger, our brain's not going to let us go there. Our brain's not going to let us forgive. But we have to peel it back, because underneath that anger is what is fueling the anger. The anger, sometimes we try to stop being angry and we're like, why can't I stop being angry? I'm trying not to be angry. Well, it's because the anger is a secondary emotion. It's not the real emotion that's making it hard for you to move forward. And until you address what's fueling the anger is not going to go away. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what is my anger trying to protect me from? And normally it's pain or fear or something vulnerable that was hard to process. We have to take care of that wound in order to be able to forgive. So it's kind of like, imagine I'm walking down the street and somebody hits me with their car and takes off, right? Hit and run. I have a broken leg. Now I can forgive. I can forgive that person. I can think, well, they must really be in a bad place to do something like that. I can make excuses. I can find reasons to forgive. But saying I forgive them and working on the forgiveness while my leg is broken is going to be really hard. I'm not going to be able to be thinking about them while I'm sitting there in pain with a broken bone. The first thing that's needed is for me to heal my wound. I have to heal that wound. Once that wound is healed and it's no longer causing me pain in my body, now I have more clear thinking because I'm not in pain. So I can now consider moving towards forgiveness. Well, it's the same thing with emotional pain. Sometimes we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to forgive because I know it's so healthy for me, but we haven't healed the wound. And that's why we keep flinging ourselves against a wall and splatting down and flinging ourselves again, trying to forgive and move forward, because we need to heal the wound. The emotional broken bones, maybe they're not physically broken, but there are some broken pieces of us that we need to gather together so we can feel whole again, so that we can resolve the pain. So some tips to help you with that wound, the pain that's fueling the anger. One of them is to validate the pain. And one of the ways that we do this, and this is literally the first thing, one of the first things I did on my recovery journey. In fact, for anyone that's been following my channel for a long time, the first thing I wrote was a PDF called I Miss Me and I Want Me Back. And in that PDF, I broke up my life, because basically that PDF was what I was doing on my journey. And then I just shared it as a PDF. But I broke up my life between periods of 5 years, birth to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, blah, blah, blah. And then I thought of what happened during those years that hurt me. And whatever came up fast to me was an unresolved wound. If I had to really think, then, I'm really digging. So I really just focused on what came up quickly. It was like my subconscious was like, oh, take care of this. This is hurting. And so I wrote it down. Now you have to understand, with narcissistic abuse or childhood trauma, you were treated in a way that was painful. And yet nobody ever said, that was wrong. I'm sorry. Are you okay? And so as a result, the pain was so overwhelming. There was nothing we could do with it, because if we tried to talk about it, it made it worse. If we tried to explain our emotions, it made it worse. So what did we do? We stifled it down inside of us. And so it's invalidated pain. We have so much accumulated invalidated pain. And that pain is craving still what it needed when it was originally hurt and didn't get. It's craving to be seen, it's craving to be heard, and it's craving to be cared about. We craved that from whoever was hurting us. We didn't get it, but that doesn't mean that they're the ones now that still have to give it to us for us to feel better. Nope. That's a mistake that we can tend to think. So yes, at one time we needed it from them. We didn't get it, but we now have. And I talk about this in my reparenting course, which I'll leave a link there for anyone that's interested in reparenting. I'll leave that there. But in that course, I talk about the fact that we now have our adult self. We didn't have our adult self back then, and we didn't have our present self 2 years ago. Okay, so who we are today has grown from even 2 years ago. So what we want to do is, from who we are today, we want to validate. We want to see, hear, and care about the pain that was inflicted. What I did was, with the list that I made, was, once a day, I would take just one memory and just bring it up and allow my present self to kind of enter that memory and tell myself from the past, the pieces of me that were hurt when that happened, right? That memory happened. I would think of that memory. And so I would see myself in that memory, and I would see myself as who I was today, entering that memory and talking to my younger self the way she needed to be spoken to. Now, that might sound woo-woo for some of you guys. That might sound crazy, but it works. It works. Trust me. Test it out. Let me know in the comment section if you do it, what happens and how it felt. Okay, but that was one thing. Learning to validate the invalidated pain. Now we can process some of that. Telling our emotions, you didn't deserve that. That was wrong. That was so messed up, can release stuck survival energy that's associated with those memories. The second thing that can be super helpful to do is to write a letter to the person. Now, you don't have to send it. In fact, I don't recommend sending it, because remember, narcissists, they're not going to validate your feelings. They're not going to care about how you feel at all. So they're not going to give you the response that you deserve when you open up and are vulnerable. They're not going to give that to you. However, your inner self needs to do that. Like, that's very therapeutic, to really acknowledge and allow our emotions to come up, to express ourselves. So you can write a letter to the person. And again, in that PDF, I Miss Me and I Want Me Back, which, by the way, you can get for free on my website. If you go to michelenieves.com, that PDF is now for free. Anyway, that was another thing, writing the letter and then reading it out loud. I remember when I first wrote one of my letters, because there were a couple of people. And so when I wrote it, like, it felt good to allow myself to bring up those things. But when I read it, all of a sudden, like, I got so emotional hearing my words. There was some kind of connection that I had when I wrote it and read it out loud. And so do that. And if you feel the emotion, let the emotion come up. It's part of releasing. And the third tip that I want to mention is tapping, doing EFT, emotional freedom technique. So there were certain memories that, even though I reparented them, even though I validated them, they just kept on coming up into my mind. And I was stuck in a trauma loop. The memory would come up, my body would react, I would feel awful. Then the thoughts would come, and the feelings and the thoughts were having a field day. And it was like keeping me stuck. So I did EFT on those specific memories, and it was amazing how it rewires the amygdala so that you don't continue to have that same intense reaction to those memories. Now, EFT is something that we do regularly in the Thriver School of Transformation on Fridays at 4 Eastern. So if you ever want to come check us out, sometimes we have group coaching, sometimes we have EFT, and sometimes we just do nervous system regulation, but you're free to check us out. But that is another modality that works. Once you can heal the wound, and once the pain is resolved, then and only then can you move on in the direction of forgiveness. But if you're still in emotional pain and you're still carrying baggages of invalidated pain and unprocessed trauma, it's going to be nearly impossible to get to that stage of forgiveness.